All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our conversations today. As a reminder, we have leveraged the QA functionality for our meeting space today. So feel free to use that to post any questions you may have for the panelists. And with that, next slide, please. My name is Shubha Kashyap. I'm the Director of Online Learning Design and Innovations here at the College of Engineering's unit known as Nexus. And we're offering a credential in the mobility space. And so this is a great webinar opportunity for us to connect with two of the esteemed faculty members who are teaching in the webinar program. In the Stackable Credential program. And so with that, I'd like to introduce John DeCicco and Monica Jones. John, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Thank you, Shubha. And good morning, everyone. My name's John DeCicco. I'm a research professor and the associate director here at the university's Energy Institute, and I'll be teaching the module on mobility and the environment.
Thanks, John. And Monica Jones.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. So I'm Monica Jones, and I am an assistant research scientist with the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. And my position there is within the biosciences group. So I look forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, Monica. And John, next slide, please. So in today's conversations, we're going to be talking about the Foundations of Mobility online certificate. We'll be launching September 1st here at the University of Michigan's College of Engineering. It's a first of its kind mobility credential. It's interdisciplinary. It covers a variety of topics. It's 100% online. Each course is 15 weeks, which the learners take at their own pace, though we do offer a recommended schedule so you can remain engaged with the faculty throughout the program. We have, because it's interdisciplinary in nature, we also have faculty from across the university who have expertise in everything from engineering. We have expertise from the law school, urban planning, public policy, the business school, and they span the program. So in one course, traditionally, you may hear from one faculty member. In this course, in one course, you will hear from 6. And what we're trying to do in this credential is create a 2-course sequence where you get a very full picture about the interdisciplinary nature of mobility and provide it at a foundational level, so this can be something that you can apply immediately in your work, or you could decide that it's an area of interest that you'd like to continue to develop and then go on to maybe a related master's degree or further credential opportunities. So for the purposes of today's webinar, we're going to be speaking specifically about the types of topics that are being covered in the courses of this credential and these courses. John DeCicco and Monica Jones each teach modules in course 1, again, which launches September 1st. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity for you to hear directly from them about the types of things they discuss in their modules. And so with that, I think what I'd like to do is move on to our first panelist, Monica. I'd love to, I know you and I have been working together over the last several months for the development of this credential. So can you tell us a little bit about your module and the types of things that you talk about in the mobility space?
Certainly. So thank you. I'm excited to share that this module covers a lot of aspects associated with health and safety of individuals within a larger mobility solution. And so within the broader input, we're focusing very much on that individual person and the safety of that individual within the overall solution. One of the things that kind of as an overall message that comes with this is that safety will always drive the design and the influence of vehicle automation, as well as all aspects of service associated with a mobility platform. So within the module, we cover three key areas. We first focus on kind of predicated research methods, R&D type approaches to occupant protection. So focusing on that multifaceted, multidisciplinary approach to injury biomechanics, trying to understand the behavioral as well as the physical aspects of that. How do we quantify injury risk and causation? And then we move from that into considerations of different special populations. So certainly there's different vulnerable road users and individuals that have unique requirements that need to be considered and addressed within the design of an overall mobility solution. And so how do we quantify that for these given populations? And then with that lens of these tools of quantifying injury biomechanics, occupant protection, and how we've applied them to these special populations, we now look forward to future solutions. And what are some of the considerations that we need to, as we're moving forward, consider in our design for different mobility solutions?
Thank you for that, Monica. I think that as we were working through your module and the type of content you would cover in this space, I think what I sort of came to realize, and I think our participants in the course will realize, is that we're often so focused on our user experience and those that we know that we often forget about those other populations, that unless we've had a specific experience directly supporting, or we're in that special population ourselves, we forget, or we don't realize what type of research and thought process goes into working with that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the research, some of the big topics associated with safety and how those become priorities?
Certainly. So when we think of the overall protection mode, we're looking often, most of it's predicated within the personal vehicle and the protection systems within that. But then when we deploy that to a broader range of audience, we have to look, as you're suggesting, at those different use cases and the challenges associated with those unique attributes. So some examples of special populations are child passengers. Obviously, they're small. The vehicle overall safety systems that are designed are not necessarily intended for their overall weight and stature. And so special circumstances such as child restraint seats systems that we're all, I'm sure, at least aware of, or at least know of someone who's used those, need to be designed to enable the child to be safe within the overall system as it exists for adults. But there's also other modifications that need to be done, for example, for wheelchair users. So people who travel within the vehicle, either if they're have mobility impairments and transfer into the seat of the vehicle and use the overall occupant protection system as intended, or individuals who travel who are not able to transfer and need to use the wheelchair as their own mode of transportation. So then what adaptations need to happen within the overall vehicle or system, whether it's a solution, to meet their needs then to ensure that the safety and the equity of that service is equivalent to someone who is able-bodied. Older drivers have some unique attributes as far as their normal aging process. We're all subsequent to that. And so what accommodations need to be made both from a physical perspective for those individuals, given different frailty and attributes, but then also cognitive and functional capabilities. And so how do we meet those needs as they change with time? Teen drivers, so there's a range of use cases. And so by applying the same principles that we use to study occupant safety, we can understand what attributes need to be addressed in future use cases.
So this is very, this is so personal to people, because when you sit in a car, you are now someone who is impacted by the type of data and research that you do, Monica. So I think that what I really liked about how you designed your module was that you helped in so many ways inform us to pieces that we're directly impacted by but don't often realize. And so one of the things if somebody was looking to take this credential, they may say, well, that sounds like something that someone who designs cars or seatbelts should know about. For someone who maybe doesn't design cars or seatbelts, why is this an important topic, or why are the topics that you're covering in the module important for someone to know about in terms of the larger conversations of mobility?
I think it's really important to be thinking about the needs beyond just the mode in the vehicle itself, whether it is a ride share or a personal vehicle, but it's access to that service or that transportation itself. So there's the curb to curb aspect of how do you ingress, egress, literally from your home to that service. There's multiple steps of points that have often gaps for different use cases and different individuals. So this starts to bring in, and this is why the course is such a broad interdisciplinary course, because it starts to bring in policy and access from a civil engineering and city planning, urban layout. So just understanding that there is such a variability in requirements across all of the range of use cases and individuals who will be subscribing to a service is really important, I think, for all people to have a broader understanding to ensure that what they're designing will indeed be accessible and effective for all the range of users in their, if it's an urban planning as an example.
Yeah, that's a great point, Monica. I was talking to a faculty member from the second course who relates to public policy, and we were talking about how some of the local and municipal implications around parking and roadways impact these special populations and how decisions are made. And so if you almost don't realize that these special populations have needs, then how do you make good local municipal decisions?
Exactly.
So it sounds like that's an awareness is an important key to serving, making good decisions and serving people.
Exactly. And then also as automation increases, these needs are going to continue to emerge and change. So understanding kind of that core user group, the unique attributes of those user groups, but then how those interactions will change as the technology, I think this will be continually evolving. And so that awareness will be key to ensure that we really are meeting that inclusivity that mobility is striving to achieve.
Thank you for that. I'd like to begin looping in our second panelist, John DeCicco, who is so intertwined in some of these topics, but in relation to the environment and how we make decisions in this space. So John DeCicco is our second panelist here. John, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your module?
Sure, be very happy to. As I mentioned in the introduction, I'm a research professor as well as have some administrative responsibilities now at the university's Energy Institute. So my primary role has been research, and my area of specialization is in fact transportation, energy, and the environment. I taught a full course on that for a number of years. So it's great to be able to share my perspectives with all of you as we go forward and think about the challenges of mobility systems today. My own training in this is primarily in engineering. I have a doctorate in mechanical engineering, but even as I was doing my engineering degree, I had a strong interest in energy and environmental issues. So I actually did research at my university's Center for Energy and Environmental Studies and took interdisciplinary courses in the environmental aspects of mobility, as well as those related to economics and public policy. And as Shubha mentioned, this field of mobility very much is one that draws on many disciplines. Particularly as an engineer, someone who was originally trained to really break problems down and quantify them into nice boxes that we could, to which we could apply, mathematical models and computer models. I learned as I worked on these issues over the years that you really need a much richer understanding than can be obtained just looking at the engineering modeling. So my own work has had me interviewing people about energy use over the years and how they use energy. I worked originally actually in energy use in buildings in my earliest work, but I began focusing on transportation, nearly 30 years ago now. So I've done quite a lot of work on that, and we have studied the behavioral aspects of vehicle choice and how that relates to the evolution of the car market, and all the very many factors that go into determining just what the environmental impacts of mobility are.
Thank you for that, John. I think as you and I were working through your modules, I think that what I really liked about the discussions in your area, that you were focusing around the word energy, and what I really liked about that, it was more, it forced us to broaden our perspectives around the terminology, as opposed to, you know, the same way that we're broadening our perspectives around the terminology of mobility. Energy has so many different facets, and it has so many different implications, and it looks different depending on where in the country you are. So as someone who may get into their car in the morning, relies on their vehicle for primary transportation, and maybe doesn't necessarily see a lot of options, right? That's my primary mode of transportation in most cases. So I often don't maybe give a lot of thought to the energy use, because it's sort of what I consider a necessity at this point. And so I don't feel like I have a lot of choices. Can you talk about where the average traveler's commute fits into the energy spectrum, and if there are ways that we could help to minimize our footprint in the larger commute in areas where we do have choices?
Sure. Yeah. As you point out, I think energy for mobility is something that under most circumstances, but not all, it becomes very easy to take for granted. You know, gasoline stations are everywhere. But, you know, most people, certainly people who, you know, been through a number of years and seen the ups and downs of the economy, and some of those ups and downs have been, in fact, you know, very much tied to the oil market and energy issues. You know, about a dozen years ago, we had oil prices spiking, and so something that, you know, most of the time we can take for granted, you know, and not worry about, is always lurking there as something that you know, can create some real problems in terms of direct you know, impacts on people's pocketbooks, you know, and how much you have to pay. I mean, to segue into a little anecdote about, well, how did I start working on transportation energy use? I'll date myself. I'm from, you know, the generation that grew up during what we call, you know, the first oil crisis in this country back in the 1970s. I finished college in, I guess it was late 1973, and went and got my first job, starting work actually in January 1974. And in October 1973 is when one of the Middle Eastern wars of that period broke out, and it was very much related to oil. The Saudi Arabians and other oil producing nations declared an embargo on the United States in retaliation for US support of Israel in a war that was going on then. And that spiked gasoline prices relative to what they were, and even created shortages. So I used to get in my car. My first car is a Ford Custom 500, and once a week have to get in line for gasoline. Now that's something that a lot of Americans haven't experienced. You know, we've experienced high gasoline prices from time to time, but something like a direct shortage was a very, shall we say, traumatic experience for American consumers at that time. So energy is always lurking there as something that is both a necessity and provides incredible, value, of course, to us for not just mobility, but every other aspect of our life, but can also have problems, economic problems, and then environmental problems. The way we get energy and the way we use it certainly has an impact on the environment. And that'll be some of the things that we get into a lot in my module.
Yeah, actually, that's a perfect segue here because one of the things that I want to sort of cover is that in the credential, you talk about quite a bit of history related to maybe policy implications and various government organizations or international and domestic policies and major reform throughout the years, and sort of point out those milestones. So John and Monica, and this is a question, and for our participants online, please feel free to post your questions in the QA functions. I'm going to jump into some of the questions that I'm already seeing. Can you talk about how you address those historic milestones and sort of pieces moving forward, both in the areas of environment and energy and safety? So there were key times where, if somebody had established new policy or changed the trajectory of safety and energy in the mobility space. John, do you want to start with a little bit of that? I know you cover those in your module as well.
Well, sure. Yeah. Well, the story that I just mentioned about the energy crisis of the 1970s, of course, triggered a public policy response. The key response at that time was what we now know as the CAFE standards, Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards, which set the rules that apply to car companies, determining how efficient the vehicles they design and sell have to be. And, that's been a debate ever since. Right now, especially, more recent years, the concerns about, say, running out of oil and things like that are greatly attenuated, especially since the United States unlocked through technology on the petroleum supply side a lot more domestic oil than we ever thought we'd be able to do even 15 years ago. So, and then of course now as we record this webinar, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and that has crashed economic activity across the board, including petroleum demand. So concerns about the price of oil, which is in inflation adjusted terms now back to some of its all-time low levels, and gasoline is quite affordable. Those factors are all things I cover in the course, and I cover the relationship between these economic forces that then affect how consumers behave and impacts on the environment and public policy. So that certainly on the energy side, that's one of the historical elements I talk about. Another historical element, of course, that's very important is air pollution. Automobiles can be a serious source of air pollution. Now they're a lot cleaner in this country than they used to be, but I go over the history there, how Los Angeles smog over a generation ago was just out of control and causing visible health problems, problems, damaging crops even. And again, that provoked a public policy response that led to tighter standards on cars, that brought in successive generations of catalytic converters, which do a great job of cleaning up that kind of pollution. So this story of how we address the impacts of mobility on the environment is a really fascinating one. Often, and it's just kind of human nature, the public and policymakers don't respond with an action to solve a problem until the problem really gets out of hand, right? And that we saw that in pollution, we saw that on the energy side. Yet, what we do see, and I think one of the great lessons from looking at things historically, is we do see that we can make great progress in solving these problems. New vehicles today are, for the most part, far cleaner and pollute much less than those that, say, I grew up with a generation ago. And I think that's very important, because when you see the scale of the problems of growing mobility worldwide, unsolved pollution problems in some countries, and then global warming, which I won't elaborate on at this very moment because I want to turn things over to Monica, but that'll be another topic we cover. That historical perspective gives us hope that we can intelligently respond, use our skills in engineering, in economics, in environmental studies, in epidemiology, and all these fields that come together in mobility to create mobility that is cleaner, safer, and more sustainable. We can do that. We've seen progress in the past.
Thank you for that, John. And Monica, I think there are also similar milestone policies and times related to safety and mobility. Is that something you talk about in the module or sort of recognize as milestones?
So certainly in the introduction, we do focus a little bit on some of the history that led to the current standards that exist today as far as federal regulations for vehicle safety. So some milestones, and it echoes the path that John laid out as far as this kind of failure, and almost to the point that we have the extreme issue. So in this case, it was fatalities. So in the 40s and 50s, a lot of the injury and safety development was done by the OEMs themselves. For example, GM led the first development of an anthropometric testing device. This is what would more commonly be referred to as a crash dummy. And so this was, again, this ownership of the OEMs, then of course is not regulating to the point that each of the, all of the different parties and stakeholders are meeting the same requirements. And with the increase of fatalities as a result of the design, some of the designs, it was an individual named Ralph Nader who wrote a book, Unsafe at Any Speed. And he was definitely a key point in reforming and bringing to light the crash safety concerns and crash readiness concerns that existed in vehicle safety at the time. And at that point, then that was a tipping point that led to federally mandated standards. So in 1966 was the Motor Vehicle Act. And so then this initiated the regulatory body as far as ensuring safety, and very much predicated on the previous fatalities and ensuring that we reduce those overall. And those are the same federal regulations that exist today, but they've continued to develop and morph. And of course, we, in vehicles and even in our own lifetime, we can see the advent of the addition of regulating seatbelts and mandating those, to the addition of airbags. And then now we have a lot more adaptive assistive safety technologies that are increasing. But then when we think of that influencing moving forward into the future, the same regulatory bodies, so NHTSA, the National Highway Safety Transportation Administration, has currently come out with the standards suggesting that all automated vehicles must meet the safety requirements of today that exist in today's personal passenger vehicles. Regardless of the level of operation, they must meet and maintain at a minimum that same intended performance level and crash worthiness levels. So certainly history plays a role, but it's continually evolving and improving the technologies and informing those.
Yeah, thank you. So this is an area where, as we move forward into the autonomous vehicle space, safety is obviously a very high topic priority, and it's something that there are so many related factors for autonomous vehicles, but when we all decide what is the highest priority as users individually, we think about our personal safety and the safety of those around us. Can you talk a little bit about, Monica, related to the safety conversations with the autonomous vehicle spaces? I know you talk a little bit about this in the module, so can you want to kind of give us a foreshadow of what students might learn in this space in your course?
Certainly. So this is an exciting time as far as AV. I mean, just Google any concept and you'll see, highly reclined seated postures with really interesting novel interior layouts, often with turtlenecks up to here, of course. But the concepts are broadening, because the notion with autonomous vehicles is that it relieves us of the driving responsibility, and now it enables us to make choices as to the behaviors, activities, non-driving related tasks we'd like to engage in. So then, of course, then what is the expectation is really, I feel like, a competitive advantage amongst a lot of the design that's happening, is trying to grapple with what will people be doing in their vehicles. Will they use it as an office space? There's this notion that we're all going to get a lot more sleep when we're in our personal automated vehicles in the future. So we've been doing a lot of research to help be a little more data driven about those decisions, to help us understand and predict at least both short-term and long-term goals and objectives for vehicle safety. So short-term, and really informing long-term as well, is focusing on today's passengers and different personal vehicles, and using that data to understand, well, what is it that people choose, what behaviors do they choose to engage in, and does that then replicate what they'll be doing in a fully autonomous vehicle in the future. So certainly we just completed a study, and we speak to this a little bit in the module, about the fact that, guess what, we don't really sleep that much in vehicles. In fact, a lot of the trips that we take, origin to destination, are less than 15 to 20 minutes in duration, because we're moving within our neighborhoods from place to place. And so it's more activity based. And so rather, this notion, which you see a lot of emphasis and flurry of excitement in the design space, in the OEM competitive market, on reclined seating and different chair configurations, rather we're not seeing it. People will definitely engage in their devices. They have that conversation with their co-passenger with them. But still understanding the challenges. So currently, the vehicles are designed for the driver, right? They're designed for upright posture, attentive, in that controlled position of engaging with the vehicle controls. So what, from a safety perspective, is the consequence of these, maybe I'll refer to them as non-nominal postures? So if we start to get into those more relaxed postures, or just we're no longer constrained to being engaged with the controls of the device, and we start to maybe cross our legs and and lean onto the console as we're engaging with our device. From a safety implication, in a crash circumstance, what is the consequence?
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of work in our lab space and others looking at, one, how do we quantify these postures that people might get into, and then the consequence of that. So using computational human body modeling, simulations essentially, to quantify the effect of reclined seating. So now you've changed the orientation and posture of the individual relative to the inherent safety systems that are in the vehicle. And so what is the consequence? Will the injury pattern and behaviors look different? And then what do we need to do to mitigate those differences? I think that, yeah, and certainly we're able to use this to be able to predict those use cases and understand at least the consequences and where we need to inform design to address those challenges.
Thank you for that. I think that that's why your module was so helpful to me in the context of the course, is because if this is an area that you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about, maybe you've thought about the structural components of the course, of the vehicle, getting a few weeks to understand safety from a different perspective, or even energy from a different perspective. If you're really focused on where you come in your work environment, when you're really focused on a particular type of energy, but you have to, you get an opportunity to look at the broader conversations. I think that's what this credential is so interesting, and this course it provides, is initial sort of awareness to many topics that you sort of seamlessly pull together for the course. And Jim Sayer, as lead faculty member, pulls together sort of at the beginning and at the end. John, in terms, I know the autonomous vehicle space is also an important conversation related to energy and the future in this space. Can you talk a little bit about what this looks like in your module?
Sure. At this point, the prospect of highly automated, fully automated vehicles is still, very much in the future. So we don't have data to really, explain how that would work in reality. There's of course a lot of testing going on and development and things like that. But what I try to do in my module is equip students with the tools for how to think about these new emerging trends. And so what I do in this class is break the mobility environment dimension down into what I call key factors. And just to give a brief preview of them, because that's how I structure the module. And then when we, towards the end of the module, talk about the possible implications of highly automated mobility, I go back and reference those factors and how might those factors change in a world with high degrees of automation. And I use the metaphor of a three-legged stool throughout my class, sort of three factors that prop up key environmental aspects of mobility. The first factor is travel demand. That's our technical term for how much we all drive, how many billions. In fact, in this country, total driving before the pandemic was approaching 3 trillion miles a year. I mean, just huge numbers. And then globally, of course, it's much larger than that. So this travel demand factor is important. And the things that shape travel demand are all things that we touch on in this class, because that then underpins the other factors. And by the way, travel demand, I present it not just in terms of, say, private automobile travel. That's the biggest factor, certainly in the United States, but I look at travel demand in the context of air and travel demand in the context of freight. How many ton miles of travel are done? How many passenger miles of air travel are done? So that's one key underlying factor in this space. The next one that's important relates to energy. It's how much energy is used to travel a mile. So in cars, I think that we have a pretty good intuition for that. We talk about fuel economy, right? Miles per gallon. So I talk about the relationship for cars and fuel economy, also apply that to trucks. And then in air, we talk about the energy intensity of air in terms of how much energy it takes to move a passenger mile, move one passenger 1 mile in air. I give examples of that. In fact, I try to create some illustrations of concrete uses of these factors for an example family, for example, and their travel demands, both for their car use and how the kind of car they use is going to affect the energy that they use and therefore the emissions associated with that. Or their alternatives. I give an example around is it better to fly or drive a certain distance in terms of the implications for energy and CO2 emissions. And then the other factor that particularly comes into play when we think about the global warming impacts of mobility is how much CO2 is associated with each unit of energy. When we burn a gallon of gasoline, about 20 pounds of CO2 comes out of the tailpipe for each gallon burned. So I talk about those factors for the different fuels and how they will change as we change mobility systems, in the case of how autonomous vehicles might affect those factors. But when we change technology, a very important technology for addressing the pollution impacts of mobility for surface transportation is electrification, electric cars. When we switch from a liquid fuel like gasoline or diesel to electricity, what does that mean? So these are all things that I touch upon as we go through the course. And that way I try to equip the students with the tools to think about how these things will change in the future, say in a world of, say, electrified and automated transportation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, I think that that's a good reminder, John, is that in this program, we're defining mobility as the movement of people, goods, and services. And I think that that's an important qualification to make, because we are looking at, as you mentioned, freight, or, and that gets traveled across multiple modalities across the supply chain. And so we are looking at not just people, even though that may be how we see ourselves as primary users, but we're also primary users of those goods and services. It may just not be something that comes first to mind or within the locus of our control as individual consumers. But we do have choices based on, we do have impact based on the choices we make. And so some of the larger conversations, but until you know that or are sort of exposed to those topics, you may not always realize what your role is as a consumer or as an advocate in certain spaces. So thank you for bringing that up. I would like to come to some of the questions that are also coming through. One of the questions here is, what are the key steps required to building a charging infrastructure to support widespread electric vehicle transportation? It appears to be a chicken versus egg issue. Not enough electric cars to build a charging station infrastructure, and not enough charging stations structure to have wide usage of electric vehicles. So John, can you speak a little bit to sort of how, what this has looked like in the past, or how we see moving forward on topics like this?
Sure, that's a great question, and it's certainly one that this country and many other countries are grappling with. In fact, have been grappling with for quite a while. You know, what's interesting, we're launching this course on September 1, and I, again, sort of as one of the more senior, i.e. older dudes on the team here, have a lot of historical perspective. And this September is actually going to be the 30th anniversary of California's zero emission vehicle ZEV mandate, where California first started its policy to transition to electric vehicles. And of course, there's still a long way to go. And so that very question of how do we get the infrastructure built where we, people aren't going to start using electric cars a lot unless it's easy to charge them. But then, the folks who need to make those investments in infrastructure, well, they're going to be reluctant to do so unless they know there's going to be customers there to pay for it. So it's as the person who asked the question pointed out, so classic chicken or egg problem. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? And of course, we know in biology, it's kind of a co-evolution that has to happen. So in the context of electric vehicles, policymakers have been giving quite a lot of support to building out a charging infrastructure. And now, 30 years have gone by and the share of electric vehicles is so small. A lot of the issue there were simply the limitations of battery technology. We're finally beginning to get beyond that. These are, I have a whole, lecture in my module about electric vehicles, and I touch on battery issues and the cost of batteries and all of that. So I have a slide showing how those costs are now coming down that make electric vehicles more affordable than they were, say, 10 years ago, certainly much more affordable than they were 30 years ago. And that is beginning to create a more of a critical mass of people tackling this chicken and egg problem, saying, okay, we can see the market for electric vehicles now really beginning to finally pick up. So it's worth investing in that infrastructure. So we're seeing utility companies like here in Michigan, and I know it's the case at many other utilities across the country, now have incentive programs. They realize that if electric vehicles get put in place, well, they're going to sell more electricity. That helps them from their business point of view. And so they're adding their weight to the mix that so far has often been, communities and things like that. So we talk about trying to do also some of this through public policy. We talk about ordinances in communities. Ordinances, are sort of rules made at a municipal level in cities and counties and other metropolitan type jurisdictions. And we're seeing EV readiness ordinances that will then require, for example, if someone is going to build a new building or new space or something like that, that it needs to be wired and have the capacity in to allow electric vehicle charging to come in. And in some cases, there's ordinances that begin to require a certain number of charging spots. So really you need sort of some, economic oomph, i.e. incentives, cash on the barrelhead to overcome this chicken and egg problem. Some of that will of necessity have to come from government. Some of it can come from utility companies who can amplify that and get more engaged. But it is indeed a challenging problem because the electric technology is a moving target. The chargers, the various levels of chargers are relevant. We need standards. There's different kinds of chargers out there. Tesla has its supercharger. There's 2 other main standards globally that are not quite fully compatible with one another that different cars have. So there's quite a lot to work through. It is that the question that was just asked is a really big one, and I do definitely touch on it in this module.
What's interesting is as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about there was a time where I think things have streamlined a little bit, but when there was this time where everybody's cell phone chargers were all different, and just this panic of, no, this doesn't plug into my phone, this does, I need a charger for mine, and I can't find my charger, but nobody else in the house's charger works. I could see some sort of conversation happening like that in this space if we sort of all branch off and do our own thing. The other thing,
very conversation has absolutely been happening. That's a great analogy. I hadn't thought of that, but it is very much like that. My plug won't fit into this car or this charger.
Yeah.
That we're starting to get past that, but
okay. Well, that's good because it's hard enough to find a place to plug in your cell phone. I'd hate to start worrying about finding a place to plug in my car. The other piece that I'm thinking is that for someone who may say, well, this doesn't really have, I'm not sure how this impacts me. I'm a small business owner in a suburban area, and I'm not sure how this impacts me. But I think that what this sort of has me thinking through is that how easily people can get to your space or how quickly where they may spend their time to charge all has implications for consumer experiences, user experiences, and how the movement of people, goods, and services may change depending on where these charging stations and what the experiences around them look and feel like for folks. Monica, I think one of the questions that we're getting, and I think that I'd love to hear from you on this, is, John mentioned his experiences and background and how he is in this space. Some of the other questions, people, I'm finding that people are coming to mobility from many walks of life, and now more than ever. And so it's not necessarily an engineer, or it's not necessarily there's not one type of person who finds himself in the mobility space or is impacted by the mobility space. Could you talk a little bit about how you came into this space and how people may find themselves coming into the related fields and interdisciplinary fields?
Certainly, and I agree. I'm an example of a very atypical path to the mobility space. So my background is actually in biological sciences, which is where we get into the injury biomechanics piece of it. And I first worked for 8 years with an automotive manufacturing, not to be named, but a company here in the Detroit local area as an ergonomics engineer there. And so very much in that case, it was looking at kind of the manufacturing and the development, a little bit on the human factors of the design aspect of it. And then there in that space, I was working with a lot of digital human models and how we represent the human in the engineering system that is the vehicle. And realizing in that circumstance that there's a lot of shortcomings, a lot of strengths. I mean, we need these tools and we need to represent the human in the loop, but maybe we weren't accurately parameterizing that interaction of the human in the system as effectively as we could. And so that motivated me to come back and do a PhD in engineering. So essentially my background, both academic and practitioner level, ends up being a hybrid of the human and the functioning biological systems of the human, but then the intersection of the human relative to these technical engineering environments, be it the vehicle or the interactions of all other aspects of the mobility technology. And so certainly I feel that there's a lot of intersections that are required, even within the health and safety range of it. We call on statistics. I know Carol Flanagan in the first module addresses big data and statistics. And so a lot of how we inform health and safety implications are based on previous crash data. So at a national level, at a state level, what are the types of crash modes and types and injuries and the demographics of the individuals? What are the nature of the trips that they're taking? And all of these aspects then affect the design and the occupant protection mode. And then in addition to that, then there's the actual computational simulations, the engineering aspects of it, and then the behaviorists. So how are people, when we look at these different special populations, what's unique about an older driver versus a teen driver versus an individual that has mobility impairments or other accessibility issues? And so certainly we need that myriad of skills to really accurately parameterize the overall, all of the different intersections that affect an effective mobility solution.
Mm-hmm. So that leads us to a question that's come up in the by the participants here is why get a certificate in mobility or why get a credential in mobility? And I think this is something that we as a group have thought quite a bit about related to this program. And what I'm finding is that the way that this certificate has been designed based on key faculty research, a balance of research, application, and practitioner-based work, is that you're getting, the courses are designed with key faculty and experts that pull these topics together to give you a orchestrated view and of the cross-section and interdisciplinary nature of mobility. And so these are all things, many of these things, I can't say that all, but many of these things, yes, you could try to Google on your own and look for and try to figure out what's reliable, what's good data, what is actually a credible source, and what is something that may or may not be based on research, data, and engineering disciplines. We also, because of our connection to the College of Engineering and the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute, we're on the forefront of knowing what is credible research, design, methods, data, and how are we, and the way that we're compiling this is to create an organized, systemic way for learners to get a good idea about this cross-section. Also, because it's being pulled together, there is a form of assessment involved, which demonstrates certain key learning aspects. And so if I were, if I'm going to spend that much time, energy, and effort learning about a specific topic, I'd also like to walk away with a key credential that I could show my clients, my customers, maybe my employers, maybe other future shapers that I'm working with, to show them that not only do I know about this topic, but I've learned from key faculty, I've engaged with key faculty on the topic, and I can demonstrate a level of learning that I have demonstrated that I have not only been learning about the topic, but I've demonstrated my competency in certain areas, and again, learn from the best around this topic. John and Monica, is there anything else you want to add in this space related to the value of having a credential or going through this program?
I echo your comments, certainly, as far as being able to navigate the amount of information, understanding the overall value, and being able to make judgments, and then how to meaningfully interpret or apply different methods is key. And I think for anyone going into this space, given the multidisciplinary nature of it, it's difficult to get your hands around all of it effectively. And so I think this gives you a broad swath of the attributes. It points you in the right directions as to what exists today, and then the tools that are out there to help you address some of those predictive nature, forward-looking questions that you might be grappling with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, I really agree with those sentiments from Monica and the earlier ones from Shuba. You know, mobility is such an exciting space in which to operate. People in quite a range of professions are impacted by mobility in some ways, not just those, say, directly in the mobility industry, as we call it, but certainly anyone involved addressing issues of urban and regional planning, public health, social equity. Mobility comes to play in all these in some way because it's so important to our lifestyles, and it has impacts. It offers great benefits, but there's safety risks, as Monica addresses in her course. There are environmental risks, as I address in my module. And so developing a better understanding of mobility is I think, valuable for people in many different professions, people thinking about many different professions. And then, of course, because of the importance of mobility and because of the growth that we see in new mobility technologies and options, there are employment opportunities in this space as well. Mm-hmm. And so our certificate is going to help inform people about the many critical dimensions of mobility, as well as help them really acquire the skills they need to better factor mobility considerations into their own jobs, whatever they might be doing now in or outside of the mobility space. And for some people, maybe help them start a new career, break in, or even strengthen their own existing career path as it intersects this world of mobility.
That's true, John. I think that this is going to be this is one of the growing sectors, and exposure to and information about mobility is a great feather to have in your other repertoire of skills, because it is such an emerging field beyond within and beyond the automotive spaces. And so we're going to be starting to see more job descriptions that even call for this. And so this is why we're trying to make sure that as many people as possible can get access to training and education and opportunities for the workforce in this space. So with that, can we share the last slide? And Monica, while we do that, and Monica and John, if you have any last remarks you'd like to share, I know we're about at time, but I want to make sure we give you an opportunity to share any final remarks.
So I think just touching on the fact that we've spoken to the fact that mobility touches all aspects of our lives. And in particular, I focus on that individual within the loop. And I want to leave you with the notion that humans are all shapes, sizes, and abilities and interests. And that variability makes mobility, to ensure that mobility is both accessible and inclusive, means that we need to increase our awareness and do justice as far as quantifying what those use cases are to ensure that we really are meeting the needs of all of these diverse user groups, to ensure that mobility ultimately becomes inclusive and accessible and safe for all individuals.
Thank you. And John, any last remarks today?
Well, just very briefly, I've been working in the mobility space with a focus on transportation, energy, and environmental issues for most of my career. And I would say it's never a dull moment. And when Jim Sayer, approached me about contributing to this module, I thought, well, that's great. That's going to be some extra work, but this is going to be a great opportunity for me to pull things together, make sure that I myself am up to date on all the things in this rapidly evolving field, and give me an opportunity to really share with a broader audience of students the excitement as well as the skills and knowledge of working in this field. And so, I really hope that, those of you listening will have some of that excitement. Obviously, you wouldn't have tuned in if you weren't interested in mobility, but I know that this was a really interesting and fun module for me to put together, and I know it was for my other colleagues in the other parts of this course. And so we really look forward to having you join us as we share what we've learned about this space that's so important for the world today and in the future.
Monica and John, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure working with you, not just today, but as we have been developing this credential. And I thank you for your time today. I want to thank the participants for joining us and providing us with some great questions. I've also, here's the slide related to more information about the online certificate. And if you have any questions, you can go to the Nexus website at the University of Michigan's College of Engineering, and there'll be more information about the program, the faculty, the courses, the modules. There's a lot of rich information there if you're looking to maybe get into this space. I look forward to seeing you all in the course, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.